At the end of the 19th century, science was advancing rapidly. Scientists had learned that microscopic germs cause disease, and they were beginning to understand that tiny invisible organisms could affect us. But soon, they began to encounter puzzling phenomena that germs alone couldn't explain. In 1892, Russian botanist Dmitry Ivanovsky was studying tobacco mosaic disease. Assuming an unknown bacterium was to blame, Ivanovsky ground up the infected leaves, passed the sap through an ultra-fine filter that should trap bacteria, and then applied the filtered sap to healthy plants. If he was right, the plants should have stayed healthy, and all he'd need to do next was find the bacteria left on the filter. Instead, the treated plants came down with the very same disease. Startled, Ivanovsky examined the filtered sap under a microscope again. No matter how closely he looked, he couldn't see anything there. Yet he became convinced something invisible was indeed present in this liquid. 6 years later, Dutch scientist Martinus Beijerinck named this unseen, smaller-than-bacteria agent virus, borrowing the Latin word for poison. Scientists continued their research on viruses, but investigating something they couldn't see was no easy task. In 1931, German scientists Ernst Ruska and Max Knoll built the first electron microscope, and at last, the moment arrived to probe a long-standing mystery. Scientists peered at viruses with excitement, and were quickly stunned. What appeared under the microscope looked unlike any life form known at the time. Viruses had neither the typical structure of a cell, nor any complex organelles. They lacked even the basics, a cell membrane, cytoplasm, and had no machinery for independent life. They were simply genetic material encased in a protein shell called a capsid. In other words, a bundle of genes wrapped in a protein coat. That was the identity the electron microscope revealed. Viruses don't generate energy, don't carry out metabolism, and don't respond to the environment on their own. Scientists were puzzled. Should we call this alive, or just a collection of organic molecules? It stood on the border between life and non-life, fitting neatly into neither. As scientists came to understand how viruses live and operate, they noticed that these entities can't even replicate themselves. A virus has to enter a host cell to copy its genetic information. In this sense, a virus began to look less like a true living organism and more like parasitic genetic material. Once inside, a virus hijacks the cell's replication machinery. Inside the host, it injects its genetic material and uses the cell's metabolic machinery to drive the endless copying of itself. That process yields hundreds or thousands of new viruses. And when the host cell is destroyed, large numbers are released. This behavior looked like a mechanical program for gene copying. This strange entity is a perfect parasite, living off the host's biology and making it work on its behalf. RNA viruses like coronaviruses invade respiratory cells and use the host's translation machinery to produce millions of viral particles, maximizing their ability to spread between hosts. Along the way, they rapidly build their protein shells, disrupt the host's immune defenses, and drive the infection forward. It's a prime example of a complex evolutionary strategy that exploits the host-virus relationship to maximum advantage. The parasitic nature of viruses and their dependence on hosts forced scientists to rethink the definition of life. As mentioned earlier, viruses lack even the basic unit of life, a cell. They have no independent metabolism and no capacity to survive on their own. Yet, in one crucial respect, viruses resemble life. They replicate genetic material, the hallmark of living systems. Everything we call alive strives to persist and leave offspring. In one way or another, it is optimized for that. Viruses are no different. Simple as they are, they're programmed to replicate and spread their genetic material with striking efficiency. All organisms on Earth, humans included, and viruses too, share something fundamental. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, in The Selfish Gene, described organisms as vehicles for the survival and replication of genes. In this view, the true agents of survival and evolution are not organisms, but genes themselves. In other words, organisms are survival machines, built to propagate their genes. From that perspective, a virus's protein shell, the capsid, and our own bodies, with consciousness, feelings, and desires, ultimately serve the same function. Because traits like these made it easier for our genes to be passed on. Then why does any of this exist? Why do we exist? Perhaps the very question, why do we exist, is itself part of an evolutionary strategy that serves gene survival. In the endless cycle of life, once humans evolved consciousness, we were compelled to seek meaning and purpose, to live, to survive, even if that meaning is merely a byproduct of evolution.